So hello, everyone. On behalf of Elephant Artist Relief Society, also known as EAR, and the EAR leadership team, I'd like to officially welcome you all to Grant Writing 101 with Canada Council. And my name is Margot Armstrong, also known by some of you as Jill. I'm a longtime EAR board member and part of EAR's programming committee. And now I'd like to begin this evening's event in the spirit of respect, reciprocity, and truth by honoring and acknowledging Mohkinstsis and the traditional Treaty 7 territory and oral practices of the Blackfoot Confederacy, including the Siksika, Kainai, Piikani, as well as the Ayasi Nakota and Tsuut'ina nations. EAR acknowledges that this territory is also cherished by the Métis Nation of Alberta Region 3 within the historical Northwest Métis homeland. We celebrate all nations, Indigenous and non, who honor this land. We are grateful to engage in an honest process of reconciliation. We are all treaty people. We're grateful to each of you for choosing to spend your evening with us. Thank you for being here. Our grant writing event this evening is a continuation of a tradition now, a resource EAR has offered for over a decade. In the past couple of years, it has been modified a little and is now integrated into our ongoing series of EAR events called Umbrella Talks. We now offer grant writing talks in February and August of each year. Normally, this one would also have been in August, but this year it was nudged into September. This is EAR's second grant writing event for the summer of 2023, and our speaker tonight will be Megan Leduc from Canada Council. She will speak about their particular grants, criteria, and process. Last month, we hosted speakers from CADA, AFA, and Carfax, Alberta. Now, just a little bit more about Elephant Artist Relief Society. Our primary purpose is to empower artists in Calgary and area to survive and thrive as artists. And these Umbrella Talks are one way we work towards achieving that. This year, we are celebrating EAR's Sweet 16. She has been serving the local arts community in Calgary and area since 2007. That year, we started out supporting visual artists only, and then in 2015, we shifted to support artists of all disciplines in Calgary and area. Even though EAR has grown and evolved over that time, our mission has remained the same: to provide practical and emergency resources to help sustain the livelihood and practice of artists of all disciplines in the Calgary area. To achieve this, EAR offers monthly professional and personal development talks, such as this one, as well as an online artist meetup group 2 Sunday afternoons every month on Facebook called Studio E. And also a wide variety of community resource information, which you can find on our website, elephantartistrelief.com. And of course, our core program of emergency financial relief for artists who find themselves in a crisis situation. Applications for emergency funds are also available on our website. As a charitable organization, we rely on our funders for our operations, but EAR couldn't provide the main offerings it exists to provide without the support we receive through our volunteers, our members starting and renewing their memberships, and the proceeds from our fundraising events to do much of what we do. Our emergency relief fund is composed entirely of donations and the money from fundraising initiatives. You can help us by raising awareness about EAR, and if you can, consider donating online to help artists in crisis. Our heartfelt thanks goes out to all of those who have already gifted EAR in the past. This year, we are encouraging our supporters to contribute a monthly donation of $16 to mark this anniversary, if that's something that you're able to do. Don't forget, every dollar donated to the emergency fund is allocated to providing relief for artists in times of need. As I mentioned earlier, another important way you can support EAR is by becoming a member. We offer many perks for our members, including our e-newsletter, discounts at a growing list of Calgary-based businesses, voting privileges at our AGM, eligibility to join the EAR board, and access to group health insurance. We have several levels of membership for individuals and organizations, details of which are on our website, elephantartistrelief.com. And we even offer a $10 yearly membership for students and those whose budgets are a little precarious. While donation cash goes to help artists in need, the money from EAR membership goes to support administration and our programming, including events like the one you are attending or watching right now. So just a few last tidbits of housekeeping. Throughout the presentation, we ask that you please keep your mics on mute and your video off, so there's minimal background interference. Please feel free to use the chat box to write your questions as they come up, and we will start a record of those for the Q&A portions of the evening. So if you have questions, please write them down in the chat. Tonight's presentation will last approximately 60 minutes, and then we will take a 10-minute break. At that time, we'll provide a link to a feedback form for you to fill out during the break. Please take the time to fill out that form. Your feedback is extremely important to us. We love hearing what you have to say, and it helps to inform how we move forward, which is really a big part of what we're all about. Then we will move on to the Q&A segment, which will take us up to around 9 p.m. So now, without further ado, I will pass you along to Megan Leduc. So enjoy the evening, everyone.
Thank you for that great introduction. Hi, my name is Megan Leduc, and my one regret last time I was in Alberta was not getting a photo with the sign of Leduc in the background. Oh. Whenever I introduce myself, I'm like, Leduc, like the bus line for the people that live in like the Quebec or Ontario region or the town in Alberta. So a quick little introduction of myself before we hop into the presentation. I've been at Canada Council for, I think it is 10 years now. Wow, time flies. So I've been through with council through quite a few of the changes that have happened over the years. And I currently work with the Explore and Create team, but I've also worked in arts abroad and arts across Canada and worked in various positions at council. So very happy to be sharing information about our grants and hopefully get everybody applying and ready for upcoming deadlines. So I'm just going to pull up the presentation. If somebody can just give me the A-OK that they see it when it's up and running. You know, there's always technical difficulties with these sort of things. All right, so just give me 1 second here. Oh, what's happening? There's a bunch. Of course, during the dry run, everything was smooth. And then there we go. Share and slideshow from the beginning. And we're good. Great. All right. So I would also like to start off our presentation here with a land acknowledgement. So the Canada Council acknowledges that our offices are located in Ottawa on the unceded, unsurrendered territory of the Anishinaabe Algonquin Nations, whose presence reaches back in time immemorial. And I am currently also located in this region. All right, so we're going to start with a very basic introduction to getting started and getting an account at council. And what we mean by getting an account, I'm speaking specifically about our portal, which is our avenue for applying and getting grants. If for whatever reason you do not have internet access, we do have an offline process if needed, but the portal is the way to go if you do have internet access and can apply for our grants. So you'll notice on every single page on our website in the top right-hand corner, there is going to be a button called our little portal button. It's green and has this little portal written here. This will always take you to that part of our website where you can apply for grants. So when you click on that, it'll give you two options, either to log in or create an account or to check your eligibility. So checking your eligibility is a lovely little functionality on the website, which actually I use quite a bit to show about the different accounts you can create and the different grants you can apply for based on the type of account you're creating. So you're going to click on this check your eligibility section of the website, and it will bring you to a page where you will be able to select from the different varieties of profiles that are available. But there is a certain consistent requirement across all of the profiles. So who are the types of applicants that can apply? So there are individuals, groups, and organizations, but typically when it comes to individuals, you have to be either a Canadian citizen or a permanent resident of Canada. You need to be at least 18 years or older. And it's open to professional artists or people who are en route to becoming one, which we call new and early career artists. So here is an example of a description for some of the fields of practice that we support. So you'll go onto the screen and it'll give you an option of different fields of practices that you can select. And it gives a general description of the type of works that are supported at Council within those fields of practice. Keeping in mind that Council wants to be open and welcoming to people from new and developing practices. So whenever you're in doubt or you're not too sure where you fit in, by all means, get in touch with us and we'll see where you may be eligible to apply. So here's a description for media arts, for example. And then once you select your field of practice, it's going to give you a series of potential profiles. So when you're creating your account, you have to have a certain profile, and that profile gives you access to grants. So under media arts, for example, one of the profiles is called an independent media artist. So you'll notice that every single one of these different types of profiles will have a description of what is required to get that profile approved. So be a professional artist, maintain a professional artistic practice with a minimum of 2 years. Those two are fairly consistent across the board for the professional artist profiles. And then for this one, you need to have created a minimum of 1 independent media artwork presented professionally. So for an example for this, for like a filmmaker, this would be somebody who their film got presented in a film festival or it's screened at an artist center, something along those lines. For an author, they had a certain work or certain collection of work that's been published. For a visual artist, they had their work in an exhibition and they've been paid for the work. So keeping in mind that different ones have slightly different qualifications, but they're going to be looking for this information in the CV that you're going to attach at the end of this process to verify that you're meeting these qualifications. So what is very important is that you're including your the types of work that you're creating, your role in those works, when they were created, where they were presented, if there was some sort of programming, curation, selection process, who was involved in that. Including all that information clearly in your CV is very important so that we can determine whether you meet the criteria. And if you do not think you qualify for any of the professional profiles, then it's important to look at the new and early career profile, which is typically for people who are starting out their artistic career. Doesn't necessarily mean that you're fresh out of school. This could be at any part of your life. That is what the new and early career profile is for. But you have to have some sort of artistic experience in your CV. Doesn't necessarily mean it has to be presented in a gallery or some sort of professional experience, but you need to have something in your portfolio because oftentimes you need to be submitting samples of your work in order to get these grants. So having some of that information in your CV can show that you're an artist, you're working towards becoming a professional artist, and therefore you're in that new and early career profile. once you're done selecting your profile, you're going to be presented with a few self-identification options. So these are optional. You're not required to self-identify if you do not want to, but it is up to you. This does give access to certain types of strategic funding and or specific grants as well. So we have culturally diverse, which is essentially racialized Canadians. You can self-identify there. There is an option for applicants who are deaf or have a disability. And this specific, if you check off this specific self-identification, it will give you access to what we call application assistance. So if you need additional services in order to fill out your application, in order to deal with any barriers related to the process of applying, you can apply for funding from us to pay to have somebody help you with that process. It also gives you access to a special grant called Access Support. So if you have any accessibility needs in order to complete the project, instead of it coming out of the regular budget of the grant that you're applying for, it's a separate thing in its own separate grant. So it's not eating in the budget of the grant that you're applying for. It's its own separate thing. So important to self-identify for that, to have access to those resources. And then we have official language minority community. So this refers to Anglophones in Quebec and Francophones outside of Quebec. And this also gives you access to a special strategic market access fund grant. And in addition to all that, all of these categories, in addition to if you self-identify as Indigenous, we have strategic funding set aside for applicants who self-identify so that we can deal with historical inequities by funding some of those projects. Another thing to keep in mind is you'll also be prompted to self-identify if you're Indigenous, which will give you access to a very specific set of profiles, which will give you access to the creating, knowing, and sharing component, which is our Indigenous created, led, and assessed component, or program rather. So if you self-identify as Indigenous when you're going through this process, it will give you access to these very specific profiles, which will give you access to creating, knowing, and sharing. However, if you want to have access to the other components such as Explore and Create, Arts Abroad, Arts Across Canada, you need to create a profile that is based on the fields of practice instead. All right, so that's phase one. I can't see the chat, so I don't know if some of those questions are filing in already, but just feel free to include them in there. And we're going to hop into the available grants now. I'm just going to take a little sip of water here. So these are the grants at a glance that are typically available to individuals and groups. There are, we have quite a few other grants that are available for organizations, but we're just kind of concentrating on individuals at the moment and groups. So you'll notice I work for the Explore and Create team. So we have professional development for artists, we have research and creation, we got concept realization. We'll get into those shortly. We'll deep dive into those a little bit more in a second. And then in Arts Across Canada and Arts Abroad, we have travel grants, residencies, and circulation and touring. And you'll notice that I put some asterisks next to certain grants because the new and early career artist profile that I was mentioning earlier only has access to those three. So if you want to apply for travel grants, once you get that extra little bit of experience, you can apply for that other profile, the professional profiles, and then you'll have access to the travel grants and residencies, etc. And then I mentioned earlier that if you create an Indigenous artist profile or any other type of, or an Indigenous group or organization, you'd have access to the Creating, Knowing, and Sharing program, which has travel grants, small scale activities, which are essentially like a small budget, micro budget kind of grant. And then there's short-term projects, which are typically a project that are a year and under, and long-term projects, which are longer-term projects over a year. And similar to the new and early career artist profile, under the Indigenous profiles, there is the aspiring artist, which has access to the small scale activities grant. All right. So professional development for artists. So this is actually a very useful grant for building up your skills. So the professional development component is specifically related to career growth in artists and artist groups. So it encourages participation in a wide range of development opportunities. So we're talking mentorships, internships, apprenticeships, specialized training, workshops. So it essentially you're going to be building up your skills to become an even better artist through this grant. They're up to $10,000. They can include, mentorship fees, registration fees, travel to get to these places. You can apply to this one once per year. And it's very useful for, building up your skill set. And I think a very useful grant for a lot of the new and early career artists. Then we have research and creation. So this supports the initial stages of the creative process for artist groups or organizations. So it's to apply to develop their creative works. Oh, just one second here. There we go. And so grants provide support for creative research, creation, project development, and research and creation can also be used for artistic residencies. I'll put a little caveat to explain that distinction there. You'll notice that I mentioned residencies in arts abroad on the last slide. That technically only applies for residencies that are happening internationally. If you're doing some sort of residency that's within Canada, you would be applying to the research and creation component here. And if you're doing some sort of self-directed residency, it also stays in the research and creation component. These grants can go up to $25,000 if it's a project under a year or less, and then it can go up to $50,000 for a 2-year project. So what typically lands under research and creation? This could be, if you're a literature applicant, this is working on a manuscript, working on a book project. If you're in media arts, it could be something along the lines of working on a script, doing some sort of research, that sort of thing. And then as it mentions, it's for the initial stages of a project. And then once it gets a little bit further along and it's going to result in a completed work, this shifts into our other component, which is concept to realization. So concept to realization component supports the full creative cycle. So from the initial idea through to the presentation at any stage of the creative continuum. So concept to realization projects need to have some sort of production or presentation aspect related to the work. So as opposed to research and creation, which we just talked about, might not necessarily result in a completed work, and you can be dealing with some sort of experimentation, trying out new things, trying out new techniques. But if at the end of the day, you're going to be coming up with a fully realized completed work, and you're going to have some sort of expenses related to presenting the work, whether that's transporting your completed work to a location, setting up a show, completing a full film, that sort of thing will go to the concept to realization component. So these grants are typically up to $60,000, exceptionally up to $100,000. So to clarify what that exceptionally up to $100,000 means is if you do have a project that is a high budget project and requires more funding, by all means, ask for more than the $60,000. It's just always important to explain the expenses related to your project and explain why all of these additional expenses to have such a high budget project is necessary for the project that you are proposing. All right. And within these two components, these are the assessment criteria. And I'm going to circle back to this a little bit later when we're talking about tips and tricks of the process. But at the end of the day, the assessment process, when these applications go to an assessment committee, they are going to be making their decisions based on the assessment criteria. So these are the criteria for the research and creation and concept to realization component. Put a little asterisk next to one because that one only applies to concept to realization and not research and creation. But it's very important that you read the assessment criteria for, every component that you're applying to, because it can be completely different. There are certain components that don't even have an artistic merit score. It's just impact, relevance, and feasibility. So if you go in and you write an application and you provide artistic merit arguments, but there isn't a score for that, you could run into some trouble there. So let's just go through briefly the criteria. So artistic merit is 50% of the score. And you'll notice that we have a minimum threshold for each of the categories. To explain a little bit of that is, in order to be recommended for a grant, you need to score above these minimum thresholds in each of the categories in order to be considered for the grant. If you score below the minimum threshold, then your application would be categorized as unsuccessful, essentially. So artistic merit is 50% of the score. So that's the artistic quality of your work, the artistic rationale of your project, and the potential artistic outcomes. Impact is 30%, the potential of your project to contribute to your or your group's artistic development, to advance artistic practice. And as I mentioned, just in concept to realization, since we're dealing with those completed works and getting it out there, to build public interest in and knowledge of the artistic practice. And then lastly, feasibility, your capacity and experience to undertake the project, and a reasonable budget, including other revenue sources, efficient use of resources, and ability to provide adequate working conditions. I'll put a little caveat to that last one. A lot of applicants have Canada Council for 100% of their project. That is okay. When other revenue sources become especially important is when you're dealing with a bigger budget project where, say, council cannot cover all of the expenses, or it's a bigger sort of project where having other revenue sources kind of shows that you're going to be getting that project out there by bringing in other partners on your project. So a little bit more of a concern when it comes to concept to realization grants than research and creation. But if you do not have other revenue sources, you're A-OK to still apply for a Canada Council grant to cover 100% of your project. All right, and a brief little explanation about our cutoff dates. So all of the components that I discussed, and even all of the ones that I mentioned on that, or that were shown on that blue screen earlier, are what we call apply anytime components. So you can apply for the grant at any time of the year. And what happens is we have cutoff dates, a little bit different, and there's a different distinction for what deadlines are for us versus cutoff dates. But since you're not going to be dealing with deadlines, I won't get into the intricacies of that. I'll explain what a cutoff date is. So, for example, research and creation and concept to realization have a cutoff date on October 4th. That's coming up. What that means is we accumulate applications up until that date, and if you get it in by that cutoff date, you are guaranteed your results by a certain time. So if you submit by October 4th, your results will be guaranteed by the end of February 2024. If for whatever reason you miss that date and you submit it the next day, it's not like it's out of the running, it's not going to get evaluated. It just means it goes into that next batch. So we start accumulating again until we hit the next cutoff date, where we'll group all those applications and have another competition. So it's just a way to kind of help you strategize getting your results. So with that in mind, your funded activities needs to start after your submission date. So say you're going to start writing your play, your magnificent play, starting tomorrow, so long as you got in your application today. Any of the expenses that you're incurring starting tomorrow are A-OK to include in your grant. Let's say you went on a trip last week to do some research and you had all of these travel expenses. Technically, those cannot be included because that is previous before your submission date. And I already just mentioned that competition results are based on when you submit your application. So whenever you submit your application based on what the next cutoff date is when you could expect your results. Application limits. They can be a little tricky to explain on our website. They're a little complicated. But essentially, for each component, there is a set number of times you can apply in a year. And then overall at council, there's a maximum amount of times you could apply in the year. So the analogy I like to give people, and please follow me on this one, is picture yourself walking into a gym and I give you 3 basketballs. And say you are a new and early career artist, we'll use that as an example. You have 3 basketballs. There is 1 net for professional development. There's 2 nets for research and creation. There are 2 nets for concept realization. I listed off 5 nets, but you only have 3 balls and you can only take your shot once per net. So it's up to you to strategically decide how you're going to take your shots. And depending on the results, if you land it, you essentially get the grant. If you land it, or if you miss it, so you didn't get the grant for whatever reason, that still counts as your shot for the year. And then on March 1st, we hit a refresh. You come back to the gym, we give you a new 3 sets of basketball, you take your shots. So that was an example for a new and early career artist. For a professional artist, it could also include residency grants would get thrown in there. So then you got 6 options to use your 3 basketballs for. You might have noticed I didn't mention travel grants. They're their own little separate thing. I take you into a back corner of the gym. I give you your own little separate basketballs for the travel grants. They're their own little separate thing. They're not counted in the overriding limit. But when in doubt, you could always get in touch with us to sort out whether you're going to hit your application limits or go over your application limits. And a little caveat here, or a little clarification, because a lot of people are uncertain about this aspect, is you're all right to submit your project twice. So say you submit to one competition, you weren't able to get the funding and you want to reapply, you're a-okay to reapply with your same project. Earlier, I was mentioning application assistance. So if you are planning to get somebody to help you with your application, so this is either you're deaf or you have a disability, or this also applies to Indigenous applicants who have a language barrier and require translation services, it's advised to get in touch with us 1 to 4 weeks in advance so we can process your request for application assistance. And then also to clarify, you're also able to get assistance in the creation of your profile in the portal. You can also get it for writing your final reports. But it is important to get in touch with us in advance because we have certain rates and we also need to approve them before we're able to receive an invoice and then pay out the service providers. All that to say, get in touch with us. It's going to be a common theme during this presentation to reach out to us if you have any questions so we can help you sort it out. All right, and now we're heading into the fun part, which is the tips and tricks, and just kind of talking a little bit about the process as well. So council bases funding decisions based on the recommendation of peer assessment committees. While some components are assessed by internal committees and assessed by council staff, both evaluate files based on our published assessment criteria. So you'll notice in each application, it'll be clearly stated whether it's internally assessed or externally assessed. So for example, in the 3 components that I kind of talked a little bit more about earlier, professional development is an internally assessed competition, while research and creation and concept to realization are externally assessed grants. So our peer assessment committees are composed of artists and arts professionals from across Canada who have the expertise required to assess applications. And they are also composed of diverse people with unique experience, insight, and who are knowledgeable of the milieu. So oftentimes we have about 4 people sitting on the committee, and they are people from all across the country. We try to get a variety of experience, fields of practice, gender balance, all of that sitting on our committee so we can get that varied perspective related to the applications that we are receiving. We want it to be reflective of the artists and the country. So I feel like a broken record talking about criteria, but criteria. Each component has its own set of criteria. Very, very important to always keep that in the back of your mind when you're filling out and answering the questions. Sometimes it's very clear which questions link up with the assessment criteria. For example, the impact criteria talks about the impact on your artistic career. Sometimes it's almost word for word for what's in the assessment criteria, and then a question that is in the form. And then in other circumstances, we're talking, for example, about feasibility and a reasonable budget. Well, then naturally, you have to make sure that that's clearly stated in your budget. Or feasibility can also be tied to your timeline, for example. So always good to keep that in the back of your mind when you're filling out your application and thinking about those points that you want to bring forward. Yes, be aware that the criteria is weighted. So it was 50, 30, 20 last time. So it's important to keep that in mind when you're filling out your application. And I kind of got a little bit of myself here. So now which criteria is meant to address, and make sure that your answer responds to those criteria. So we were talking about artistic merit. Oftentimes that'll be reflected in the description of the project that you're proposing. This will also be in the support materials, so samples of your work that you're including in your application to show your previous work and your skills. I mentioned feasibility can be the budget. It can be also your timeline. So is your timeline realistic? Does it make sense? Also, is everybody getting paid adequately for their work? And as I mentioned earlier, that the committee is made up of a variety of people or artists around the country. You don't want to leave them second guessing anything. So don't assume that the committee knows you, your work, your community, or your theme. Context is key. They only receive the information that you're submitting in your application. If you do not provide that context within your application, they are not going to look elsewhere to find it. So it's important to include context within your application. If your practice or your project is highly specialized, very specific, or dealing with something especially new, it might be really important to provide a little bit of context, a little bit of an explanation, so that they can understand what your project is going to be about. Don't assume that the committee can read between the lines. They can't assess what you don't tell them. What I always tell people when they get in touch with me is, specifically, for example, when it comes to the budget, something might seem obvious to you to put a line item in the budget, but we're talking about a variety of people looking at the same thing. Some people might come to one conclusion, the other assessor might come to a different conclusion, and then when they talk to each other, they don't come to an agreement, and therefore, if it's unclear, then it could ding you in the score. It could have a little bit of a impact on the score in the assessment criteria. Don't assume that the committee is cynical or aloof or looking for you to impress them with your fancy words. They want you to succeed, and they want you to write in your own authentic voice. This is very important. They're artists themselves or arts professionals themselves. They are very passionate about supporting artists around the country. They can tell that people are passionate about their projects. So it's really good to be true to yourself and share your passion about your project that you're going to be proposing. Some quick little tips about budgets. I was kind of touching on this earlier. It's very important to clearly explain your expenses. There is a budget notes column in all of our budget forms where you can elaborate on your expenses. It's technically optional, but honestly, it should be mandatory just to take out any guesswork so that the committee doesn't have to second guess what any of your expenses are. The more detailed, the better. Ensure that your budget is balanced. What does that mean? That your expenses equals your revenues. So at the top of your budget, there'll be an expense section where you can include all of your costs. And then at the bottom, you'll have a revenue section. And sometimes your revenue section is just the grant you're applying for. Totally okay. Just make sure that your application is balanced. And also important that if you're getting other sources of revenue, or say the project is going to be more expensive than whatever the grant can cover, then be sure that you have those other revenue sources to balance out your budget. Ensure you are paying yourselves and paying your collaborators fairly. This is very, very important and then often reflects in your feasibility score. So we want to make sure that we're supporting Canadian artists across the country. So make sure that you are paying yourself and fairly paying your collaborators. And just a quick little reminder, because sometimes I find people get a little confused when they get to our budget. The form and the application in general are meant for artists from various fields of practice, covering various activities. So some sections may or may not apply to your activity. That's okay. Don't feel the need to have to slot in things into the budget just to fill it out. Fill out whatever is relevant to you, and that is okay. All right, we're getting a little close on time. We'll just make sure we wrap up on these last few slides here. So in your grant application, there's going to be a few elements that are included. You're going to be prompted to update your CV right at the beginning of the process, and that will be included with your application, which provides a little bit of context about your history, your skills, what you've accomplished so far. And, you know, we were talking about feasibility that can kind of tie into that score possibly. But there is other attached material that comes in with your application. So you'll be filling out the application form, and then there'll be certain attachments that you can include. So the attachments serve two purposes. It's to reassure the jury about your abilities to do the project and help the jury get a better artistic sense of your work and or your current project. So there is usually a required documents section where you can include resumes of your collaborators, letters of support, partnership agreements, producer agreements, any sort of confirmation that kind of supports the project that you're proposing. And the second type would be support material. And this is a means this means examples of your work, so your creative or cultural work. This can be written, visual, or audio documentation, and it really depends on the type of work that you do. So it should include current work or activities with a relationship or relevance to the grant application. You might want to include earlier work or activities that provide context for your application, and you might want to include works in progress or the work that's being produced. That is only if you are at that point in your project. If you aren't at that point yet, don't throw something together for the sake of it. It's better to just include previous work of yours to just show your skills related to the upcoming project. But if you are a little bit further along, always great to include a work in progress. It gives them a better picture of what the finished product is going to be like. So a little bit more on support material. The peers get about 10 to 15 minutes to review your material, and you need to be strategic with this. So you're going to upload your material in order of importance. You're also going to have to number it. Otherwise, it just goes in alphabetical order. Keeping in mind that they only have those 10 to 15 minutes, the most important stuff at the top. And if they run out of time, then they might not be able to get to the items at the end. So it's always best to include clips or excerpts as a time-saving measure to make sure that they're going to be reviewing the important stuff. Another alternative is you can upload longer pieces and tell them to read a certain excerpt. So say they're a fast reader, maybe they can read a little bit, other extra pages of your support material. But it's very important to make sure that you're clear in what aspect or what element of your support material you want them to review. And then, and if you do not include timestamps, excerpts, etc., they'll either start at the beginning or go through the support material within the allotted time. Also, and very important, if you are sending links, especially password protected links, make sure that the passwords work. Also, make sure that the links do not expire. The entire process can take several months. As I mentioned, we have a cutoff coming up in October, and results are coming out in February, which means that your application can be reviewed in that in-between time, which can be several months. So it's important to make sure that those things are active so that they can access it at a later date. All right, we're winding down. Just a quick little reminder that council staff is here to help you. You can always get in touch with us when you're starting out your process. If you're not certain where you need to apply, you don't know where your application is supposed to go, you're not too sure if the project is eligible, please, please, please get in touch with us. We're always happy to direct you to the right component and make sure that you're applying in the right place. So and if you have any questions about the process, the application, eligibility, please let us know. We have emails specific to each program, and that is the best way to get in touch with us. Also, we have the phone numbers here for each of the programs I was talking about earlier. If you send an email or leave a voicemail to these numbers, what happens is our team redirects it to an officer. So it's always great to get in touch with us as far in advance as possible so that we can help you. As you probably can guess, things get very busy the closer we get to our deadlines or cutoff dates. So it's always great to try and get a head start on that. Because then we're dealing with such an influx of inquiries that, we want to get back to everybody in time for the deadline, or the cutoff rather. So it's always good to get a little bit of a head start on those. And we also have our general contact page for any of the other components. We also have a general email called info@canadacouncil.ca, which is also at this part of our website, the contact us part of our website, in case you're having any issues with the portal or any other aspect of our website. So I'm just going to stop screen sharing here. Oh, no, I don't want a new share. I want to stop screen sharing. Oh, there it is. There we are. I know I'm a bit of a quick talker, but we got in just on the hour mark. I'm proud of myself there. So I'm very much looking forward to questions that people have, but I think we're heading into the break now, correct?
Yes, that's right. And no, your timing was excellent. And there is quite quite a long list of questions coming up. This looks really good. Okay, so thank you so much, Megan. And please relax for a few minutes while now we get you guys to go into the chat. And Carolyn has just put in the feedback form that we really, really would like you to fill out if you possibly can. It'll just take a couple of minutes. And like I said, it really helps us steer what we do and find material to present to you to help you to survive and thrive as an artist. So please do that. It's your way of having a voice in this process. So let's see. It's coming up to 4 minutes to 8. So we'll start back at about 6 minutes after 8. Okay. Okay, everybody, we're going to start back up in about 1 minute.
There's some good questions in the chat and looking forward to it.
I was muted, sorry. No, it's quite an impressive stream of questions. I'm amazed. Okay, everybody. I think that's about 1 minute. All right, so we're back for the Q&A section, and like Megan and I were just noting, it's quite an impressive stream of questions. So I'm going to ask Vivian to start at wherever you started. I imagine probably with the earliest ones, and just let us know what's in the chat.
Sure. I'll start at the top and then work my way down, and hopefully we'll be able to make it through all of them. But there are quite a few questions.
Just one quick little thing, Vivian. I do want to
Sure.
jump in with one question in advance in case people need to leave early, because I noticed a little bit further down, and I just want to make it absolutely clear. We support a very wide variety of field of practice. Somebody was asking if we support music. The majority of the applications, not the majority, but the biggest volume of applications receive and explore and create are from music applicants. So I'm just going to briefly list off the fields of practice that we have. So circus arts, dance, deaf and disability arts, digital arts, interarts, literature, media arts, music and sound, theater, visual arts. And for organizations, there's multidisciplinary activities as well. So just want to make it absolutely clear in case somebody needs to go and do something else. I don't want them to think that that's not an option. So yes, it's very varied on there. All right, go ahead. Sorry.
Oh, no problem. That's great. So Tammy had a few questions right off the bat. The first one is, in regards to applying for grants for people with disabilities, is it possible to get a mentor?
All right, so a mentor, you might need to clarify this for me, Tammy, in what context you're referring to it. So I'm going to talk about a few different contexts, and hopefully I'll address your question. So you can have a mentor related to a specific project that you're proposing. So say, I'm going to give an extreme example here. Say you're a playwright and then you're working on your first film and you've never made a film before. Maybe you're going to need a mentor to stand in on your project to kind of make sure that it's going on the right path and you're going to be able to complete the project. So you're okay to include a mentor. If it's specific to a project, then it would be in a research and creation or concept to realization application. Then there is just straight out a mentorship, which sometimes is related to picking up a certain skill that can be submitted to a professional development application. So the mentor usually relates to either picking up a skill or supporting a certain project. When you mean a mentor to help with your grants, if you're a person with a disability, are you referring to the segment where I was talking about application assistance? We don't necessarily call them mentors. You're able to get, we call it like a service provider, to essentially help you with the process of writing your application, submitting your application. And then there's the other process, which we call access support. So you could submit an application in order to do a specific project. And then there's access support. So if you need an assistant to make sure that you're able to carry out the project because you can't do certain activities due to a disability, or say you need an interpreter, etc., then that would be an access support submission. I don't think we would necessarily call them a mentor, but it's more of like a service provider kind of situation. I hope that addresses your question. I kind of covered a lot of bases there. Does that make sense, Tammy? I guess we'll see later in the chat. But maybe we can hop to the next question while we get a follow-up.
Okay, so Tammy had another question earlier in the questions section, and it is it possible to use grant dollars to pay for a studio space?
Yes. Let's play with that. Yes.
Answer.
Yeah, so that's a common expense in research and creation or concept realization. Yeah.
Okay. So Tammy also has another question, which is, if you are a collective, for example, 2 people applying, do you get to apply for the grant ×2?
Okay, so you can create an account as an individual, you can create an account as a group or a collective, and then there's also organizations. So a way to think of it is each of those are their own separate entity with their own set of application limits. So that basketball analogy that I was saying earlier applies to you as an individual, and then again as a group or a collective, and then again as an organization. They're all their own little separate thing. If you're going to apply for a project as a group, then you can create a group profile, make sure that you read through the qualifications to qualify for a group profile, and then you can submit it. If for whatever reason you don't qualify as a group, you can always have one person be the lead on the project, submit it, and then include everybody else as collaborators. That's okay. What's an important distinction between the two is if you do apply as an individual, you will get a T4A in your name, and then you are also responsible for the whole reporting of the grant afterwards if it's successful. If it's a group that applies, then we don't send out a T4A. It's up to you to file your taxes accordingly.
Okay, thanks for that answer. Preemi asks, hi Megan, can you talk about how they score artistic merit or give examples of an application that might be scored for a low merit and one for a high merit?
All right, so artistic merit tends to land into a few aspects of the application. So if something that has strong artistic merit, the person includes really strong examples of their work, so that we could see your style, your skills, and your ability to deliver on this new project. And then the project that you're proposing is also interesting, new, innovative. You're pushing boundaries, you're trying something new out, or elevating even your own skills in the process. So that is what the committee is going to be looking for when it comes to the artistic merit score. So it tends to be concentrated in your samples of your work that you include or your works in progress, and the project that you're proposing and the ideas related to that.
Okay, thank you for that answer. Tammy has another question. They ask, if you have a full-time job, can you still apply for this? And
yes. I'm sorry, I'm getting out of myself there. Yes, there's no, we don't have any caveats around other employment related to getting a grant. So you can have a full-time job elsewhere, you can have a part-time job elsewhere. That's fine by us.
And what about paying hours for yourself? So like paying yourself for your hours or for your expenses, your living expenses, does that also apply?
Yes, so that's actually a very important aspect of your budget and your grant application. So you want to pay yourself. The committee is looking for that in the application. It's considered part of your feasibility. If you're not able to pay your bills, then how are you going to follow through on the project? So you're expected to pay yourself an artist's fee for when you're working on the project. So for example, I'm going to give a literature example, because they tend to have the easiest budgets typically. So in research and creation, a literature applicant can submit to work on a manuscript for a year, and that could be $25,000 to sit at home and work on their manuscript. And that's just covering their living expenses. One line in the budget, one and done. And then the revenue section, obviously asking for the grant from Canada Council. So that's A-okay to be asking for just money to support yourself. and then any other related expenses to work on a specific project. And then, more collaborators or more elaborate the project is, and depending on your field of practice, obviously you're probably going to have different sets of expenses depending on what your field of practice is. Then those get added in to your budget. But yes, you should be paying yourself. Some people go by giving themselves a weekly rate, a monthly rate. Some people just total up how much their expenses are for the month, and then they put that in for how long their project is going to be. You could also use a certain industry or association rates for providing certain services. When it comes to collaborators, you can ask for them to give you a quote for their services, and that's what you can include in the budget for their line item. It's essentially making sure that the project is going to be able to be carried out because everybody is going to be fairly compensated to do the work.
That's great. Thank you. I mean, paying artists is so important. So it's really good to hear that encouragement. Tammy also has another question, which is, if you have a disability, can members help you develop your CV? For example, my ADHD makes it very difficult to organize the logistical part of my practice. Can you apply to get help with your online social presentation? I am also interested in legal advice in regards to artistic trademarking.
All right, so you can apply for application assistance in the process of creating a profile and creating an account with us. So you could get in touch with us. It would be through info@canadacouncil.ca, and you would put in a request to have us cover a service provider to essentially help you with the creation of your account and profile. And then, as I mentioned earlier, you can apply again or get in touch with us again in advance of submitting your application to help with that process as well. When it comes to legal advice related to artistic trademarking, that could be something you could include as a line item, most likely under a concept to realization grant specifically. The reason why I say that one specifically is because typically you're doing a completed project at that point, and any expenses kind of related to after the work is done is only really eligible in concept to realization. So I could see that being a line item there related to kind of wrapping up the project and trademarking, but we don't have a grant specific to just doing that. So if you are just looking for support to get legal advice to do trademarking, then that isn't an activity on its own. But say you create a new project, and as part of that project, hey, I want to make sure I trademark and sort that all out at the end, you can include that as a line item in your budget. But on its own, no.
Okay, thanks for that answer. Ernesto was wondering, can you apply to get funding as a writer if the language of your work is not French or English?
Yes. In that circumstance, what would happen is we'd have to get a special assessor on board to make sure that we can get a perspective related to your field in the language that you're submitting. So you can apply for a project that isn't in French or English, and then we'd have to bring on a special assessor to look over your samples of work, if your samples of work are specifically in that language, and to ensure that your final work that you're actually going to create is competitive. So yes. We also get a lot of applicants that are doing projects in Indigenous languages as well, so that's okay.
And another related writing question is, if you are a writer who wants to write a graphic novel, would the grant cover the expense of hiring an artist?
Yes, so you typically the applicants that we get are the leads on the projects that are doing or creating the graphic novel themselves. Something that's important to kind of keep in mind is if you are hiring somebody, you also have to be talking about the impact and of this project on yourself as well, and not just the people that you're going to be hiring in on this project. So yeah, you can hire somebody to help you with that sort of project and include it in your grant. I'm going to put in a slight little caveat and kind of distinction.
It's not related to writing projects, but specifically when it comes to media arts projects, for example, you need to be the director of the work and own the rights to the work. So that's like in another field where specifically you need to be the person doing that specific work, but there isn't that clear distinction in literature. So, and FYI, graphic novels fall under our literature umbrella. So if you haven't created a profile yet, it would be under there. I guess another little qualifying point that's important to know is you can create a profile in whichever field of practice you want. If you want to go and do a project in a completely different field, so you're a musician and then you're taking up pottery, you can apply for a pottery project. Go for it. There's nothing stopping you from doing things in different fields or doing projects that are kind of a mix of two fields. What I would advise, though, is if you are doing a very big shift, it's always good to have something in your portfolio related to that new field that you're heading into, because you're going to need those samples of work included with your application. So don't let it stop you from doing something that's, out of your comfort zone. But what's usually a good idea is you get in with that professional development grant first to build up those skills and hopefully get some more stuff in your portfolio. And then you come in for a research and creation or concept realization grant to actually carry out the project. A little tangent there, but I'm just like, good to know.
Okay, thank you. Ellie has the question. They're saying, so if a script is complete for the project you're applying for, would it still be useful to attach it if the time limit of evaluation is 10 to 15 minutes? I assume so, yes?
Yes, please do. If you have something, a work in progress that is far enough along that you can attach it with your application, it's always a great idea to include it. If you're proposing like a film project and you have a script, it's good to include your script or an excerpt of your script, and then also some other sort of audiovisual or actually video support material so that they have an idea of what your style is like and your skills related to filmmaking. Because if they only have the script, they don't have any point of reference for your skills in filmmaking. So very, very important if you are at that point where you can include mood boards, storyboards, works in progress, drafts, please do include it. Don't force it if you're not at that point yet. The committee very, very much appreciates having that included in the application.
Okay. Diana Arts says, hi, Megan. Thanks for all this precise information. I have a few questions below. Is it possible to hire international professionals for a project? Would the grant cover their fees?
Yes. Oh, sorry.
No, go ahead. That's what kind of questions.
So eager. Yes. So we don't have any Canadian content requirements, I guess some people would call it. So long as you meet the criteria, you got your profile approved, which means you're a Canadian citizen or a permanent resident, you can go work completely international. I've had some people go and they do an entire project in Japan with Japanese collaborators, totally okay, and they're paying them. Just make sure that you're paying them fairly, whether that's either the Canadian rate or their local rate, whichever one is higher. So totally okay.
Okay, so the next question that they have is, in the case of a participatory project where people share their lived experiences in audio and or visual content or are invited as guest speakers at an event, are they getting artist fees or an honorarium? And then further to this, the budget template for concept to realization mentions professional and artist fees. Is it possible to pay an honorarium?
Yes. So oftentimes people would enter that as an honorarium. So guest speakers, somebody giving their time to participate in a documentary or something like that. Yes, you can enter so that there's certain fixed lines in the budget, and then there's certain ones that are open. So you could just type in honorarium, explain who it's for, and put it in a fee in your budget. And having honorariums are appreciated by the committee. So it's a good idea to include those in your application.
Okay, and they have a couple other questions. Do we need to add quotes as supporting materials for the budget? Yeah, I guess that's a standalone question there.
quotes for people's services. I'm trying to like distinguish, because like when I hear supporting materials, I'm thinking samples of work that's included with the application. So when I hear quotes, I'm thinking about fees that we're paying people. So I think I briefly touched on this before. If somebody is providing you services, you can include like an email or some sort of confirmation of like a quote for their services, and you can put that as a line item in the budget. That is okay.
Okay, Diane Arts, please step in if
Yeah,
I'm
sorry. Thank you. Thank you so much. Like all your answers are super useful. For the quotes I was asking, like even if we buy stuff, materials and like rentals, like because I didn't see any lines about that, but I just saw the notes. So do we need, or is it a good thing or bad thing to add that?
Okay, so are you talking specifically about like, okay, so like if you were to like get certain equipment or like to buy certain things,
Yes.
getting quotes from people. Okay, yeah, so you can include that in your like required document section. I don't think it's too much of a deal breaker. You can just say I've received, like in the notes of your budget, just say I got a quote for this much for this item or whatever. That's totally fine to include that in your budget. They just want to know the details of your expenses, essentially. Yeah, that's totally fine to include it. There is a little caveat related to equipment costs, specifically in research and creation and concepts realization, where no one item can be more than $1,000. And overall, it can't be more than 10% of your budget. So say you need to get a brand new laptop to do this work. If it's $1,000, you're in the clear. If it's $1,500, you can only ask for $1,000 max on it. So that's one little thing to keep in mind. And equipment specifically talks about kind of like more of those big ticket items. We're not talking about like paint or like things like that, smaller little things in order to get like that are necessary for the creation of the project. It's more of like long-term items that you can use over a longer period of time, more like a capital cost in some cases. So.
Okay, and Diane Arts was also asking about, is there a maximum duration for the projects in Explore and Create?
So typically the projects last around a year. That is fine if it goes over a year. Oftentimes there's delays, life happens. There isn't a hard set timeline for it though, but typically it's projects that are a year. What you might run into an issue is if your project lasts several years, it's going to require a pretty high budget, and then you might be running out of funds in order to cover a project that's covering such a long period of time. So as I mentioned, research and creation can go up to 2 years, and it's 25 for 1 year, 50,000 for 2 years, and then concept to realization just has a higher ceiling of 60,000 or up to 100,000, depending on the project. But yeah, typically they're 1 year projects. They can be longer than a year. What's important is that your timeline makes sense for what you're proposing. You're not rushing something that takes more time to get it done. If it takes more time to get it done, this is how long it takes to get it done. This is how much it costs. It's just a matter of being thorough.
Okay, and they have one more question, and it is for the concept to realization grant. Do you need to have already secured the venue for your dissemination event?
So typically, yes, with the exception of media arts applicants, because film festivals don't book a film until it's done. So long as you have a completed work, in that case, you're fine. For applicants in other fields, it's a really good idea to have some sort of confirmation from a venue that you're presenting the work. When it comes to music, it's a-okay if you're going to be completing a work and then publishing it to some sort of, it is essentially some sort of presentation is getting it out there. So whether that's putting it up on Spotify or some other sort of music service, that also counts as some sort of presentation aspect to it. So typically applicants include some sort of email confirmation or letter from any partner that's related to the project. And it's always good to have some sort of information of the audience that this is getting out to, how you're going to be promoting or getting it out there, because a part of your impact score relates to getting it out to audiences.
Okay, thanks. This feels a little bit like rapid fire questions, but you're doing super well and very thorough in your answers, which is great. Stephanie asks, if you are relatively new in the field for your personal work stream, but you have been doing work, doing many large-scale projects and performances for many years as a lead artist and representative at an arts agency, so you have a portfolio of that work, and it's on CV, would you be considered emerging or professional?
Okay. Clear distinction of our profiles. We have one called new and early career artists, and then we call them the professional profile, so all the other artist profiles. If you're not certain where you land between these two, submit both of them and we'll sort it out for you in the process, and we'll approve whichever one makes sense for you. Essentially, if you, I'm guessing, if we're mentioning portfolios and projects,
like, I've been
performances,
arts-
I'm assuming we're leaning, what field are we talking about here?
Oh, video arts, media arts,
Okay,
visual
well,
arts.
okay,
Been
well,
with an
here's the
arts
thing.
agency for like 10 years. So I have a lot of installations.
Okay. Well, for you, what I would
So I
suggest
have that
is,
work. I just don't, but my own personal portfolio is like brand new. So
okay.
technically I'm emerging, but then I'm also professional since I have lots of experience doing those different types of projects.
Okay. I think your strategy for you would specifically be to apply for a new and early career artist profile in visual arts, media arts, and then also a visual artist profile and a independent media artist profile all at once, and see where it comes out
how it goes.
at the
Okay.
end. And
See
then
how it comes out
just
in the wash. Okay.
yeah. So just make sure you include all of your experience.
Yeah.
For visual arts, they're looking specifically that you have 2 years of experience, you're a professional, and that you have at least one paid exhibition. So if you have some sort of paid exhibition in your history, whether it's a group or solo show or some sort of performance,
Or
just
a paid residency.
Ooh, I guess it depends on it. Just provide that context in your application. There's also a little field when you're submitting that's just kind of like additional info. That's always a good little spot to be like, hey, I got paid for this specific entry, or hey, this installation that I set up was specifically in this spot and it was curated by so and so. So you can get a little bit more specific if you don't want to mess with the formatting of your CV in that section. But yeah, it's good to, if you're not certain, just submit them all and we'll just approve the ones that make sense. And just a little reminder, or not a reminder, FYI to everybody out there, when you submit a profile, oftentimes profiles get rejected because we just don't have the information necessary in the CV. So don't be discouraged if it gets declined. Pay close attention to the comments that are included in the email. It might just be a matter of including additional information and resubmitting it. Keep in mind that this can take a little time for approval. If we're in a busy period, it could take a little bit, a few weeks for it to get approved. So please submit them ASAP if you're hoping to get in on the October cutoff that's coming off soon.
Okay. You mentioned a little bit earlier about self-directed residencies. Are there specific criteria that define what a self-directed residency is?
No, we leave that up to you. The only thing that we have a specific definition and distinction for is we have the Arts Abroad residency component, which specifically means it's like some sort of established organization that has a program that you got into and you have an invitation to go to, and it lasts more than 5 days. So that is very, very specific. Essentially everything outside of that falls in research and creation. So we don't have any parameters on what a self-directed residency is. It could be whatever you make it out to be. That's fine. We just have to make we just want to make the distinction of like, why is this specifically in Arts Abroad residencies and what is everything else? Yeah. So that's essentially the distinction there. So we don't have any parameters for it. It's up to you. You can be whatever you want it to be.
Okay, thanks. That's great. Bindu asks, could you please talk more about the travel grants for a film? We would like to screen in different places in Canada and abroad.
Oh, well, I used to work on travel grants all the time. So you can apply to a travel grant in Arts Across Canada and Arts Abroad as a filmmaker once a year in each. What you're going to need is some sort of invitation to the event that you're going to be presenting your work. So an invitation is a required document to those components. There are some specific activities where it might not be required, but if it is for a presentation of your work, you need to have some sort of invitation. They're based on fixed rates. So in Canada, it's based on how far you're traveling. And abroad, it's based on the region that you're traveling to. So say you're going to Europe, the fixed rate is $2,250. That breaks down to $150 a day for up to 5 days for accommodation and meals, and then $1,500 for transportation costs, which is your cab, your airfare, trains, whatever you need to do to get around. Then you could also request up to $2,500 for shipping costs. So if you're a visual artist, for example, and you need to bring a sculpture, you can include those shipping costs. And then also very important, if you're in a very remote region and you have like additional travel expenses because you need to drive for several hours to one town and then wake up in the morning the next day and then go to the airport in another region to fly out, there is a northern allowance of up to $2,000 that is also available. Travel grants are internally assessed. And we were talking about the different assessment criteria. There's no artistic merit there. We're looking specifically at impact, relevance, and feasibility in those components.
And sorry, hi, this is Bindu. Just wanted to know, can you only apply after you finish the project?
For travel grants, you have to have, if you're presenting the work, I'm assuming it's completed and you have some sort of invitation. So, I mean, I guess if the work isn't done, but you already have an invitation, then you're fine. You can include it and you can submit it. That's a-okay.
And it still takes about 3 months to get the grant?
Yes. So travel grants runs on a slightly different, it's essentially the same as the other grants, but they don't have set cutoff dates posted on the website. So say you submit your application on October 1st, you're guaranteed to get your results within 3 months. So October, November, December, you're going to get your results before January 1st, essentially. So they're just continuously receiving applications, and they have a competition essentially when they received enough applications, or they're hitting a point where they have to make sure the results get out in time to hit that 3-month turnaround. So you'll get it within 3 months. If you're lucky, you can get it even faster than that. Like it's just just by happening when you happen to submit it. It can be like as short as a month or even less sometimes. I think we turned out some results in 3 weeks if you got lucky, right at the end when we finished collecting applications. But yeah, it'll just depend on when you submit it, and you will get it within 3 months. So 3 months is the longest you'll wait.
Thank you.
Okay, Ellie has a question. In terms of attaching collaborators to a project such as a film, would this mean casting and hiring of all crew must be done before applying? Or would it be more so along if you are co-directing or co-producing the project, then you would need to attach them?
That's a really great question. Yeah, we don't expect you to have your entire cast and crew. Same thing for like if you're doing a theater production and having all the actors in place. We understand that especially if you're at the beginning parts of your project, you're not going to have that in place. What is more important is your key collaborators. So if there are certain people that are absolutely necessary to the completion of your project, then you want to have those confirmed. If it's still up in the air and you're sorting it out, you can still put a line item in your budget for certain roles in your project, put some money aside for them and just say, to be confirmed, going to figure that out when I get a little bit further along in the project. That's totally fine. Similar to another fun example I like to give people is like, say you're doing some sort of like documentary project on I don't know, I'm just going to say Beyonce or something off the top of my head. You're going to want to have some sort of confirmation that they know that you exist and that they're on board for the project, essentially. So whatever information confirmations are vital to the completion of the project, you want to include those confirmations in your application.
Okay, so a question from Stephanie regarding international residencies. Should we get a support letter from the international residency host? If we are collaborating with someone in that country, should we include their rate in the application? Should we include their CV, etc.? And should that international artist also set up a profile in CCA?
I'll start with the last bit. Only Canadian artists and permanent residents have access to our grants. There's only a select few international organizations that have access to grants, so it doesn't apply in this case. For residencies, I haven't dabbled in those recently, so I'm not absolutely certain the flexibility of the eligible expenses in arts abroad residency. So I'd encourage you to send those questions specifically to the arts abroad team so that they can tell you whether it's eligible or not. Related to a letter of support, you're going to need some sort of confirmation that you're participating in this residency. So that could be, you know, a confirmation email that you got in. And sometimes that often comes with a letter of support. A lot of applicants reach out to the organizations to get those letters to help, you know, build an argument to support their project and include it with their application. A letter of support is not required, but an invitation is. And sometimes they're kind of a 2-in-1 kind of deal. So it'll be up to you whether you want to include it with your application.
Okay. Alexa Bunnell asks, maybe this isn't a question you can answer, but would applying for a creative research project that includes consultations with other artists that also work within topics that I want to work with strengthen that application? Is it an applicable expense within research and creation? Additionally, if one is doing self-directed individual creative research for the research and creation grant, how narrow could a research question topic be? Could it strengthen an application to have a more focused idea or project? So that's kind of two questions I asked you.
Yeah, it's kind of melts together a little bit. So if you have to consult with certain people to do the research for your project, then you're fine to include that as an expense for your project. We're very open with what is eligible as an expense in research and creation and concept to realization. Basically, the outline essentially says anything related to the expenses of the project. So that's all right to include those expenses there. How narrow you want to get with your research, it's honestly up to you. Some people do some very narrow, very specific research. That's totally fine. I wouldn't say it necessarily strengthens or weakens your application. It's up to you, and it also what it boils down to is the arguments that you provide in your application and how it relates to the assessment criteria.
Okay, thanks for that answer. 33 Visuals asks, what would be considered a successful grant submission? If my project is controversial but informative, is it frowned upon?
So controversial projects get funded quite often at council. It's going to vary based on, I feel as if this is such a non-answer, so apologies, but it's what information that you include in your application and does it relate to the assessment criteria. It almost always going to boil down to the assessment criteria and how you're making arguments related to that. I mean, I have mentioned that, you know, this is a peer assessment process. We're talking about artists from around the country. Depending on the competition that you end up with, it could be that the committee receives it well. It could go into another competition and it doesn't get received as well based on the assessors that are around the table, there is a certain luck of the draw that kind of gets into play in that process. So it's always important to think back on what the assessment criteria is and include some information that relates to that to back up your project. If you are dealing with controversial subjects, it's always good to provide a little bit of context and then also explain how you're going to be addressing some of these sensitive subjects in the final product of your work, just so that the peer assessors can know what the final product is going to look like. But yeah, we support a wide variety of projects. Some could be very mundane, some could be very in subject matter, and then some can be pretty controversial. It'll still boil down to, at the end of the day, the assessment criteria.
Okay, thank you for that. Zara asks, she has two questions. First of all, she says, or she or he, or they say, thank you so much for the great information that you are sharing. I have two questions. First, how can I apply for a grant as a professional artist or an emerging artist? I had 3 exhibitions in Calgary and Canmore, and I received the Immigrants Distinction Award in the Art and Culture last year, but I couldn't sell my paintings yet. Second, for payment, does the artist fee work?
So you received an artist fee for these exhibitions? If yes, then apply for under visual arts, visual artist. If you did not received an artist fee for these presentations and you've been doing this for less than 2 years, then you would apply for new and early career artists. If you're still on the fence, same advice I gave to somebody earlier, apply for both and we'll decide whichever one best suits your experience. So you can apply for new and early career under visual arts or just visual arts artist as an option for the profiles.
Excuse me, sorry, I'm Zahra. Thank you for your answer. I asked only for the budget of in the grant.
Okay.
Fee works. That means, for example, no, it's about $50 per hour. So if
Okay.
I would like to mention my for my salary in this grant, I need to mention to $50 per hour, or maybe the minimum wage.
It's up to you how you want to include your fee in the budget. There's a few different strategies. It really depends on the project that you're proposing. If it's something that's happening over a longer period of time, it might make more sense to do a weekly, monthly rate. It could be a matter of totaling up your expenses of what you need to cover your living expenses over a certain period of time and include that in the budget, or you can include certain professional fees or rates. So it could be like, okay, these are the CARFAC rates for doing this specific activity. I'm including that as my rate in the budget. So there's slightly different strategies depending on your circumstances. All are accepted. What's important is your logic, your reasoning behind it, and is it feasible for you to carry out the project with the amount that you're paying yourself?
Thank you.
No problem.
Okay, we're down to the last 2 questions, so we're getting really close to the end, which would be awesome if we can ask everybody's questions. The next question is very similar to the last question regarding categories. Ellie is wondering, for a photographer, filmmaker, if you've never been paid for exhibiting your work, but you have been paid for your services, would you recommend applying for new or professional?
So they're specifically looking for you to be paid for your independent artistic work. So if you were hired I'm going to give like a specific commercial example. So if you were hired to do like wedding photography, for example, that wouldn't qualify as receiving a fee for your independent artistic work. When in doubt, I think I said this for like a few times, so apologies, it's repetitive. In this case, if you're a photographer and a filmmaker, photographer tends to land under the visual arts umbrella, and filmmaker lands under the media arts umbrella. I would apply for visual artists, independent media artists under the professional category if you're not certain, and then also media arts, visual arts, new and early career artists. If you haven't received a fee for presenting your independent work.
Okay, and we're at our last question. It's Bindu is wondering, you mentioned that the grant you are applying for must start after the cutoff date, so it can start before the results arrive?
Yeah, so what's important to us is that essentially your expenses, your activities start after your submission date. So sometimes you're working on a specific timeline, or you're going to be doing your project whether you get the grant or not. That's totally fine, so long as you receive your application before you start that part of the project or the expenses. I mentioned before that you could technically apply for a project that you've already started and you just need to get the money to finish it off. That's also fine. It doesn't mean you have to always submit at the beginning of the process of your project. So you can apply at any part of your project, but only the expenses and activities after your submission date are eligible. So let me give like a outlandish example. We have a cutoff date on October 4th coming up. Say you have to fly to Hong Kong to see the pink dolphins in the bay next week. You absolutely have to do it. That's the only week they're there. If you get in your application before you leave, you're okay to include all of those expenses within your grant. You're doing it at a risk, though, because there's no guarantee you're going to get the grant and you're going to be on the hook for those expenses if it isn't funded. And you're going to be waiting until the results come out in February. So that's something to keep in mind. So sometimes people will be working on a manuscript for a book. They're going to be doing it with or without us. They're going to be typing away on their work. That's totally fine. They can be working on it between, the time that they submit until the results come out in February. That's a-okay. If they get the grant, it'll essentially cover it retroactively in that sense. But where we draw the line is essentially anything before your submission date is ineligible expenses. It has to be after your submission date. It doesn't relate to the cutoff date whatsoever. The cutoff date is just an indication of when you can expect your results. That is it. If it comes in the next day, it just means you're going to get your results in the next batch. So what's important is your submission date when it relates to your timeline and activities and your expenses.
Okay, thank you. A couple of last minute questions came in, but I just thought I'd check with Margot to see if we had time to ask those last questions.
We can rapid fire them.
Yeah, that's, I was just wondering about that too. I think, well, 7 minutes, we might be able to squeeze them in. Let's give it a try.
Okay, that sounds good. I have an anonymous question. It's, I've retired from my non-artistic job, so I take in a pension. But if I apply for a CCA grant and I don't include an artist fee, will this confuse the judges?
I mean, I guess you're technically not obligated to include a fee, but it's always a good idea to, because it just kind of, you want to be compensated for your work. It might throw them off a little bit. If you're not including a fee for yourself, you're going to want to include some reasoning behind it within your application, but it's always good to pay yourself. Like, please do pay yourself. As I mentioned before, people have other jobs. We're not expecting everybody to drop every other thing they have going on in their life to just work on the grant. Some people do because they're like, hey, I have the freedom to do this project now because I have the funding. I could cover my expenses. That's great. But you're not expected to drop whatever else you have going. And even if you have other sources of revenue or another job or other payments coming in, you can still pay yourself. That's fine. I suggest paying yourself. You might as well be compensated for your time. There are certain circumstances where some people might put some of their services as in-kind contributions to a project. This could sometimes happen if, say, you're going over budget and you can't accommodate all of your expenses, so you're going to, donate some studio space or some of your equipment to do the work, or maybe a little bit of your time. But I would advise against not paying yourself. Please do pay yourself.
Mhm. Okay, and Ellie is asking, would a commercial you are hired for count as exhibiting payment?
Technically, no, because that would be commercial or non-independent work. It has to be some sort of presentation of your own artwork that would count as a receiving a fee to qualify for a visual arts profile. I also want to make a little distinction because we've been talking a lot about visual arts and media arts examples. Visual arts specifically has that requirement for receiving a fee. I think also under music, you have to receive a fee for performing or presenting in some capacity, but that's not necessarily the case in all the fields of practice. So it's very important to just read what the requirements are for each one to make sure if you qualify. And when in doubt, for the 20th time, apply for a new and early career artist and the corresponding professional profile at the same time if you're not too certain which one you qualify for.
Mm-hmm. Okay, and this is truly the last question from Tammy. Can you apply for Canada and Alberta grants at the same time? Because we don't know which one might say yes.
Yeah, we do not have any restrictions on where you apply for grants. You'll also notice in our budget form under the revenue, section, we leave it open for confirmed or pending other sources of revenue. So say, you're hoping for the Canada Council grant, you're also hoping for a grant from somewhere else. You could put those two in as pending sources of revenue. We're also very open to updates and changes to your project. So say the other funding doesn't come through. Obviously, if you're successful, let us know, send you updated budget timeline, and tell us how the project is going to be impacted by, say, only doing it with a Canada Council grant and not the other grant. There's a lot of flexibility there, but in short, yes, you can have other sources of revenue. You can apply to multiple places. Just keep us in the loop if you receive other funding sources or the other funding sources fall through, especially if they're both included in your budget. But you're welcome to apply to multiple places to make your project happen. We want you to succeed in your project, so go for it.
Okay, so was that really and truly the final question, Vivian?
Well, after I said that, yeah, I did get one more question.
We got 2.5 minutes. Go
for it.
Here goes. Question for a friend. If she is working on literary piece to develop the piece, so applies for the development grant, however, later she wants to sell the work, does that make her ineligible?
No, that's fine. They would apply for a research and creation grant. Literary projects go specifically to research and creation. This happens quite a bit. So often what's important is that you're in charge of your project, you're the lead on your project, you have creative control over your project. If it happens to get picked up by somebody after the fact, good for you. So oftentimes people will be pitching their works to publishers to get it published in with any of the traditional publishers. We fund a lot of those as well at Canada Council. I didn't get into that whole side of things. There's quite a few publishers that are supported through our core grants, essentially. But yeah, that's fine. A similar thing happens with our media arts applicants. You're supposed to do an independent artwork, so you have creative and editorial control over the work. And if CBC happens to pick up your film and airs it on their documentary channel, that's totally fine. We'd have a concern though if CBC was involved in making all of the decisions and that's submitted to us. That wouldn't fly. But after the fact, whatever happens to it after the fact is your own business. You're fine.
Okay. I think we got it covered. That was amazing. Thank you so much, Megan, and thank all of you who attended today and brought your very thoughtful questions. I'm sure a lot of people who didn't ask those questions also got a lot out of them and the answers. So wow, this was wonderful. So yeah, I think this was awesome, and good luck with your grants. That's all I can say. And I know that you can, of course, approach council if you have more questions. I believe you have to ask those questions by email now, right? Isn't that the way it is? Or can you still?
By email or phone numbers. We have phone numbers that essentially will get redirected to different officers within the team. So we have a variety of officers who are former artists, arts administrators, or still currently practicing artists, actually. And actually quite a few people from around the country, that have started work at council. And so everybody has like different specializations, as you probably have guessed. I tend to have a media arts, visual arts, and literature specialty. So those types of questions tend to get redirected to me, but I have colleagues who are like theater, dance, circus arts, etc. So they tend to redirect to people with those expertise to kind of talk about those little nuances that might be involved in those applications. So the best thing to do is go onto our Contact Us section of our website. There'll be all of the different programs. Either call the number or send an email, give a brief outline of the project that you're thinking of applying for, so that they can redirect it to the right person. And if you're getting a little hung up on the application process or like the portal specifically, or creating an account, I mentioned a few times we have info@canadacouncil.ca. That'll also be on the Contact Us page. But yes, please get in touch with us there. Don't second guess yourself. You don't want to go through the whole process of filling out an application only to find out you can't apply for that project and that component, for example. Always best to touch base with somebody in advance. And you'll notice in all of our application forms, it says, if this is your first time applying, please touch base with us. So always a good idea.
Okay. Well, that was a nice note to finish on. So once again, thank you very much, Megan Leduc. And thanks everyone for being here, and have a great night.
Thank you, everybody. Good luck with your applications.
Mm-hmm.
Megan's still here. I can remove her, or if you guys still want to chat.
Okay, sure.
I'll head out. I was just in case you had anything for me. I was just like, I'll stick around just in case. But thank you again for having me.
Thank you.
Have a good night, everybody.
You're awesome. Take care. Bye-bye.
Take care.
Great job, everybody.
Yeah, Megan was wonderful.
She's enthusiastic and, very thorough in her answers, and yeah, she did a great job.
Mm-hmm. Wow.
Yeah, it was a lot more, I think everyone that's ever presented from the Canada Council has been awesome, but I don't know, there was an energy to her tonight that was just really great.
Mm-hmm. I was noticing too that when Michael did his presentations, the attendance was abysmally low for the most part. It was terrible and embarrassing even. And for her, it was huge. So I'm wondering why that is. But
And this was unusual because it come up quite quickly. I'm not
Yeah.
sure that we were able to do a boost on Facebook. Marianne, can you answer that? Do you know
We
if
were not able to do a boost on Facebook.
so as far as I know, I tried to like every time I saw it that Marianne posted. And then I shared it to every group I belong to. And I shared it all across the country. I shared it with every sculpture group I belong to, and I belong to one in every province, the museum sector, visual arts, yeah. So we did a lot of more organic type of promotion this time.
I wonder if also the time of year, maybe it affects it. I'm not sure, but everybody in a lot of ways, September is like a reset of the year, sort of like January is a reset. Maybe that has something to do with it.
Well, Michael has presented for us like 2 or 3 times, and I started wondering if maybe there's also a difference between having a white male versus a female of color. I don't know.
That's a good point.
Yeah, that might have influenced some of the people who potentially attend or not.
However, I will interject. I don't think there was a profile of the speaker that was posted on socials.
They're not allowed to provide one. All they can do is provide a photo and have their name and say that they are they're with the Canada Council. That's all they can say.
Oh, okay, but we didn't even. All we did was post her name.
Oh, I'm sorry. I thought okay. Huh.
Yeah, I come back from California and this was already, I got on the plane and I could see Marianne starting to share it. So I knew it was organized and up and running. So
Yeah. I must say I neglected to share it at all, which I haven't done for a long time, but at least I got her here. That's what I did. So,
yeah, exactly. And you did a great job of the intro. Very well done. Every time you do it, you get better and better, Margot. I'm so proud of you.
thank you. Well, I have to tell you that I am in the middle of moving hell. I'm kind of losing my mind here. The moving date has been moved again to Saturday, and I still have so much to do, and I'm not feeling well. And the chance